Welcome to Chasing Squirrels podcast, where we explore the stories of change and change makers in education.
I always say that it's not to be scared of being flexible and letting your students know that you don't know everything all the time. Yeah, and just trust that it's gonna work out. And then if it doesn't, well, you try it again tomorrow. What are you gonna do? I'm prepared to be the only. I don't want to be the only, but I'm ready for it if I have to be.
All right, folks, welcome to Chasing Squirrels podcast, a podcast where mistakes happen and making the best of a situation is our mantra. So this week, I did not take proper steps in checking my equipment. Last week, I was in a podcast and some of my colleagues that were listening to me said that I sounded a little bit like I was on a Doctor Who episode. I didn't think much of it. Actually, I totally forgot about it. At the time, I was like, I got to hear this audio. It's probably pretty awesome. But throughout that other podcast, my colleagues were just cracking up. They're like, well, here comes Cliff again, and it sounds like he's underwater. So this week, I got a chance to talk with Gonzalez. And AJ is a personalized alternative education instructor, spec ed instructor, and also is doing a little bit of guidance in Ontario, Canada. And a big part of our conversation kind of floated around the fact that in alt ed, a big part of finding success and finding passion and finding the connection with the kids is making the best of random situations, making the best of multiple course load, making the best of every moment that you have in the classroom with those students. And really, if I take what I learned from AJ this week, apply it against the huge mistake that I made with, what been learning about how to fix the audio on my own podcast, then I don't feel so bad. I think to myself, I'll figure this one out. I'll make the best of it, and hopefully my next podcast, I'll be able to have some new tools or new angles to fix a mistake that could be coming down the pipe. So the switch up for this week will be that I gotta throw the questions in on a separate track. So this is gonna be new territory. Not quite sure where it's gonna end. I know that AJ's story is fantastic, and I know that in the end it's about her talking and not me. So without further ado, here is, half the conversation I had with AJ, and the other half is me dubbed in. Here we go. So first off, I wanted to know from her perspective, what is personalized alternative education?
What is it for me? Oh, it's a very difficult question to answer, and I always struggle with it when people ask me, well, what is it? And I always just say, well, it's kind of what it sounds like. It's personalized education. So I have students coming from so many different places, and they just, for some reason or another, they have a difficult time in a day school or in a mainstream program. And I don't like using those words, but for the sake of understanding, I'm going to use it that way. And for some reason, they just have difficulty in a regular classroom. So I give them the opportunity to learn differently, to learn at their own pace, to be able to adapt what they're learning, to make it experiential, to kind of meet them where they're at.
So I have some background in alt ed as well, and often I'm asked by my colleagues, how do you work in an environment like that? Like, what does it look like to teach inside of a personalized alternative education program. And here's what AJ had to say.
They will see uh, 16 different students working on possibly 16 different things, 6 different subjects. They will see me moving around, talking to all of these kids. They'll see some students working together. They'll see some students working on their own, some students on laptops, some students writing on a whiteboard because they can't sit still. Some students, sitting outside in the hallway because they don't want to be inside the same room. Some students getting up and walking around. So you'll see a lot. There's a lot of action. There's a lot of differences. There's a lot of everything going on.
AJ's in her second year of placement in personalized alternative education. So I was wondering what looked different in her second year, what she had switched up so that program could run a little bit more smoothly. Here's what she said.
Oh, yes, completely. Because I went in there thinking, okay, this is how I'm going to do it. I had a great plan. I thought, okay, I'm going to go in and I'm going to teach everything in this way. And then I saw the students and I met them and it just changed. And then this year you get a different group, and it's actually every 9 weeks you get a different group. So it has to change. I have no choice but to change it. It's quad programming, so our classes are split up into 4 quads as opposed to 2 semesters, and I do 1 class in the morning and 1 class in the afternoon. So for 9 weeks straight, students are taking 2 credits as opposed to 4. And then I have some students who are graduating after 1 quad. There's some students who need only 1 or 2 to graduate. So they're coming in to just kind of finish it off.
Working in programs like personalized alternative education and even in the program that I work on, where I work with students that are suspended and expelled, I've been asked, why, and this is from the students, why would you want to work in a program like this? And I quickly and boldly tell, whoever asks, that it's intentional. I really do enjoy working in smaller class spaces where I can make deeper and more direct connection with the success with the students. And as AJ and I were kind of hashing this out, she kind of agreed.
Yeah, I always say, I was that student. I hated school, and I don't want students to feel like they hate school. And I enjoy teaching you guys. I always tell them that. I say I came here with a purpose. I applied to it just like you say, and I enjoy this. This is where I have fun. I always tell them if I'm in a bigger class, teaching to 30 students, I'm not having this much fun. I'm not getting to talk to people. I'm not getting to enjoy and get to know my students. So I always tell them that I'm there because I want to be there, and I enjoy it. I enjoy their company. I think that's the biggest thing. I tell them all the time, I enjoy your company and I enjoy seeing you do well. That's my goal.
So for me, it wasn't all that challenging to get involved in these small programs and to start building relationships on the small scale with fewer students. And despite fewer students, some pretty complex teaching environments. But getting into the program then and getting into these smaller spaces sometimes presents some challenges, especially when you go to staff meetings and you start to kind of share experiences, some of the moments that happen in your classroom. Here's AJ.
Yes, and it's the hardest part about being where we are, that we go to these staff meetings and everybody's talking about these experiences and these goals and these things that they're doing, and you think to yourself, well, is that going to work with me? I'm so different. I'm doing things so differently. And you want to try to find that balance in between doing what's happening, going through what's happening in mainstream, but then still doing what you need to do for your students who don't necessarily fit that profile. I'll have an assignment and it's all ready to go. And I'm like, oh, this is going to be great. And then I have a student who looks at me and says, can I do it this way? I'm just like, you know what? Go ahead. It works. It works. Just add this, or just make sure you include this. Because what I need to see is that you're able to do A, B, and C. So if you can show me that you can do A, B, and C, go for it.
So, I was wondering, what do you share with your colleagues when you get to their the staff meetings, and it's, you go around the table and talk about your learning experiences from your classrooms. What kind of advice do you give to regular program teachers?
I always say that it's not to be scared of being flexible and letting your students know that you don't know everything all the time. Because I'm teaching like six different subjects, and to be completely honest, I may not know everything about every single subject that I'm doing, and I'm really not scared about telling my students that I don't know that. And say, you know what? I don't know the answer to that. Let's look it up together. Let's figure it out. And you don't get to know them in the same way. Like, you don't get to see what makes them tick. And I mean, I feel like at the end, by the end of the quad, the student doesn't have to say to me, hey, can I do it in this way? I can sort of predict, you know what, this is going to work for you. And I can present them with something that they don't have to ask to change, or that they don't have to, you know, alter themselves. They can just say to me, oh, yes, she gets me now.
We started to talk a little bit about what we felt our purpose was in working in these programs. And I find in looking at alternative or smaller programs, at some point, um, the instructor or the educator in the room will come back to the fact that these young people that they work with, making them feel safe, making them feel wanted, making them feel connected, is also a big part of being in the classroom.
For them, sometimes the important thing is knowing that there's somebody who's their cheerleader and who's saying to them, okay, you got this, you can do it, or opening up their mind to something that they thought they couldn't do, or that they didn't even think about being able to go to a college program, or being able to try out a new job, but you've been able to sort of point them towards a different direction. And that has nothing to do with teaching them math, that has nothing to do with teaching them English. It has everything to do with, like you said, the connectivity and knowing them, and being able to say, this is what I see this in you, go for it. Yeah, I think because you're connected to them, you really care about them. And when something doesn't go their way, or doesn't go the way that you imagined it, because at the end of the day, they're teenagers, and stuff is going to happen, and they're going to make mistakes. And sometimes when you're that connected, or you take so much, you put so much effort into trying to help them see their potential, and they maybe don't get there with you, it's sort of heartbreaking, because you know exactly what they could do, and then they don't see it in themselves, or they just don't get to it. And you can't help everybody. You can't do it all the time.
I wondered what it was like not only working so intensively with this small group of students, but also getting outside of that classroom. Because of her multiple portfolio, she was also involved with guidance, is involved with guidance and spec ed. And I was curious as to what that looked like to the students when she finally made it out of the class.
I know. Well, for me, it's like I walk through the halls and I'll talk to kids, and because of the guidance role, I get to meet different kids from the entire school. But it's funny because then they'll be like, "Oh, but Miss, what do you teach?" So then it's kind of like, well, I teach, the alternative, and I kind of just do a little brief explanation. I don't really go into very much, and they're like, "Oh, that room over there?" And I'm like, "Yeah." And then they always say, "Well, can I be in your class? How do I pick that class in my course selection?" Yeah, and I always say, like, it's a special one. And, there's a process to get into that class, or to get into my class. There's a process. Yeah, I was like, you have to interview, and you and I have to have a conversation. And they're like, okay, well, let's do it. Let's do it.
AJ brings other experiences to her current teaching role. And when she and I first met, she was the lead instructor in a program called Section 23. Here's her explanation of that.
Yeah, so it's a day treatment program, and essentially you have students who are completely outside of the system, and they are, I mean, in that program, they were living in a group home, and they had a lot of changes in their mental health. And the way that I saw it was, they they kind of lost their way in terms of how they learned, and they just needed to relearn how to learn and get ready to be back into a mainstream school. They weren't ready to be in school. It wasn't their first priority. They were dealing with a whole lot of other things. And so day treatment is linked to a treatment program. So there's a teacher, myself, and then I had two child and youth workers who were in the classroom with me. And we sort of worked together to create a program that was educational but also treatment.
One of the things that first made me notice AJ when we were working together was her. I can say nothing else other than joy at participating in different committees, teams, different activities. She connected herself with prom. She helped out with sports. She was on school groups and school professional development teams. And there was just so much that she was connected with. I was always curious what fueled her amazing energy.
I never felt like I had to. It's just something that I enjoy doing. I do things because I enjoy them, not because I feel like I have to. And but when I said that I felt like I had to, it's because I did it. I felt like I had to for my students, but I enjoyed it for myself. Just if that makes sense, because my students are so outside of the system, I felt like I needed to make them feel like we're part of this school. Yes, we're separate, but your teacher is part of this school. If your teacher is part of this school, you are part of this school. We all belong together. We're not separate. And I mean, they feel isolated enough with everything that they're going through. They're in a classroom the entire day. I mean, even the bathroom was in our classroom. Like there was some times where students would be using the washroom in our classroom because they couldn't use the washrooms outside of the school because they needed to be supervised. So I just felt like I owed it to them for them to see that they weren't isolated and that their teacher was a part of something. And so by default, they were a part of something.
We shifted gears a bit, and I wanted to ask her about her teaching abroad. Um, AJ has left the country to explore teaching in some farther parts of the world. And in the pursuit of finding out why she would do that, I also had never actually heard any of the backstory about how she had got involved with it and what made her say yes.
Like I said, it's not something that I'd ever thought about doing, but our principal at the time at that school that we were at together was going to be the teach abroad principal. And he approached me and he said, "Hey, I think you might enjoy this. I have a really difficult time not trying something when it's put out there for me." So he said, "Think you'd enjoy it? Think about it." And I said, "Oh, I don't know." I kind of walked away from that saying, "That's crazy. I would never do that." And then I talked to Jocelyn, who had done it before. So Jocelyn. And she was saying, "Oh, I might go." And so it was a little bit of a push. There's going to be somebody that I know there. Oh, it's here. I would never do it otherwise. It's kind of right in front of me. If I don't go for it now, I'll never do it. So I just went for it. And I loved it. And it was life-changing, actually. It was it was an amazing experience. I actually had never traveled that far before, I think, which is also like, okay, you're going to go on a trip. And, the furthest you've ever gone is Central America. But you know what? Today you're going to go all the way, 15-hour flight, and you're going to go there. And it's going to be a place that you've never even really thought about and that you've never really looked into at all. And the toilets are going to be squat toilets. And that was the biggest thing that was on my mind was the toilets.
So once she got over the squat toilet issue, I was wondering what the actual teaching and learning experience was like when she was there.
Well, I mean, it's sort of you're teaching with a broad array of teachers, and it's like secondary and elementary teachers together. And to me, that was the most eye-opening, and not eye-opening, but just it was the biggest learning opportunity for me because we're so we can I don't know, we're always so separate from the elementary And I think when you're working together, I learned so much from those teachers and their ability to just sort of go with the flow and have fun and be silly and play games and have sort of uncontrolled chaos, and how much learning can happen in this fun environment in these games, and just kind of letting go and just embracing it. I learned so much from that because I'm so used to in secondary, although I'm coming from, like we said, on the fringe of, the mainstream classes, and there's a lot of flexibility. It's still sort of prescribed because I'm following a curriculum. I have to do this within this time frame. And it wasn't like that. It was so open, and it was just, you don't have to, there's no structure. There is structure, but it's sort of uncontrolled because you don't know where that game is going to go. You don't know how long you're going to be playing Typhoon, which I never even knew existed before I went to Taiwan. So I learned so much from them in that context.
And then, of course, I had to know, what did you learn from the students there?
I learned, so I know it's like you always say, like, your positivity, right? The positivity. But I don't really think about how much that affects the students in front of me. It is who I am. It's what I do. It's just me. And at the end of each of those little teaching blocks that we had, one of the students was like, "Oh, thank you, miss, for, not teaching me how to say something in English, or not teaching me about Canada, but teaching me that it's okay to smile, that teachers are funny, that, they just kept saying, you're very interesting." That was sort of the word. And I was always like, not sure. What is that? Yeah, it's like, what does that mean? Is that just kind of like your word for, I don't know how to describe you. You're just kind of like out there. So I think that for me was the biggest thing, that how much of an impact that personality, or being able to, and then it goes back to the connection, how important that is, because they don't have that.
And the big question, will she go back again?
I don't know. A big part of me wants to go back and wants to try it again and just wants to enjoy it again. But I don't know. It's a huge commitment. And there's just so much going on here sometimes that you get bogged down with sort of life. And it's saying I have to leave for 5 weeks, right? And you're just so far away. And but I mean, I think given another opportunity at some point, I definitely will do it again. Yeah, it teaches you to simplify. It really taught me to simplify. It was yeah, you're like, okay, break it down, take a step back, slow down, enjoy it, take it in.
So as we get closer and closer to the end of the podcast, I was curious about what's next on the horizon for AJ. What is she aiming for? What might she be looking to change up in the near future?
I think I'm really enjoying the experience within that guidance frame, and it's a very different experience because, again, you're not in a classroom at all, and you're getting to know students on a whole different level, and you're doing all of these different things. And I think I want to explore that a little bit more. I want to spend some more time there. I don't know that I'm ready to leave alternative education yet. That I'm ready to say, okay, I'm just gonna, I'm gonna step down from my position, and I'm gonna just go for full-time guidance. I'm not sure I'm ready for that yet, because I do like that connection to the classroom.
So either in guidance in the future or in alt ed, I wondered, what's the similarity there, though? Like, how is it that she sees that she can exist in both spaces? And really, what's the kind of like the personal fuel that she's got to help create positive change for students in and around her?
I think I'm going to bring the positive. I mean, for me, I think it's the positivity and the ability to kind of look at something and help my students kind of work through it just look at things differently. I, man, I don't know, Clough. I don't know. It's hard because for me, I just I always want to be that person for these students that, that's there. Like, I like to think of it and say, if I wasn't there and if I wasn't the one that was pushing them or encouraging them, they might be getting suspended tomorrow because I'm not there to advocate for them. And I think for me, that's sort of who I am for my school and for my students. I'm the one that's going to look at them and not say, you know what, you're just being that kid. You're being difficult. I like to look at, where's that coming from? And I like to think that I'm the one to support them in that. That's going to have their back. That's going to be able to understand where they're coming from and not jump to conclusions. I'm just going to go with that for now.
Chasing Squirrels podcast can be found on iTunes and Podbean. If you ever want to reach out and have a conversation with me on this podcast, you can find me at chrisjclough@gmail.com, or you can find me on Twitter at chrisjclough. It was great bringing this story to you. Really, really glad I got a chance to talk to AJ. And overall, I think the episode kind of turned out okay. So until next time, take care. Thanks for listening.